The cruelest breakups don't begin with screaming. They begin with silence. At 2:13 in the morning, Ethan Cole stepped out of the elevator with his loosened tie hanging around his collar and the bitter smell of whiskey still clinging to his coat. Manhattan rain tapped softly against the glass walls of the penthouse lobby while the night guard gave him the same tired nod as always. Ethan barely noticed. His phone buzzed nonstop with emails from investors, dinner photos from clients, and one unread message from Claire sent 3 hours earlier. Drive safe. He never opened it. He pushed open the penthouse door expecting warmth, expecting light, expecting her. For 12 years, Claire Bennett had always left the kitchen light on for him. No matter how late he came home, no matter how cold he acted, no matter how many dinners went untouched across from an empty chair. But tonight, the apartment was dark. Completely dark. Ethan frowned slightly as he tossed his keys onto the marble counter. Claire. His voice echoed softly through the massive living room. No answer. He walked farther inside, unbuttoning his cuffs. The city skyline shimmered outside the windows like gold scattered across black water, but the apartment felt strangely hollow, quiet in a way it had never been before. Then he noticed it. The candle beside the kitchen sink was cold. Claire always lit that candle after sunset. Vanilla and cedarwood. The scent was gone. Ethan checked the bedroom. Empty. Bathroom. Empty. Her favorite cream sweater that usually hung over the reading chair was missing too. He exhaled a short laugh under his breath and pulled out his phone. You're being dramatic again, he muttered while dialing her number. Straight to voicemail. Ethan rolled his eyes and loosened his collar further. Unbelievable. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, then froze. The refrigerator was half empty. Her almond milk was gone. The strawberries she bought every Tuesday were gone. Even the little handwritten notes she used to leave on the shelves had disappeared. Suddenly the apartment didn't look lived in anymore. It looked staged, like a luxury hotel suite waiting for its next guest. Ethan called again. Voicemail. He smirked to himself, trying to ignore the strange heaviness crawling into his chest. Claire loved him too much to actually leave. Everyone knew that. His friends joked about it all the time. That woman worships you. They would laugh during poker nights downtown. Ethan used to laugh too, because somewhere along the years, Claire's loyalty stopped feeling precious. It started feeling permanent. Guaranteed. Like air conditioning or running water. Something that would always be there when he came home. He walked back into the kitchen and finally noticed the wedding photo was missing from the counter beside the espresso machine. Only a pale rectangle remained where the frame had once stood. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. The silence around him deepened. Then his phone buzzed. His eyes lifted instantly. One new message from Claire. Just 6 words. I got tired of disappearing first. Ethan read it twice. Then 3 times. Outside, thunder rolled softly above Manhattan, while the empty apartment swallowed the sound whole. Some people do not notice love disappearing until the house stops sounding like home. Ethan barely slept that night. He lay across the king-sized bed staring at the ceiling while Manhattan glowed outside the windows in cold silver reflections. Claire's side of the mattress remained untouched. Too neat. Too empty. Around 4 in the morning, he finally convinced himself she was trying to prove a point. She had done emotional things before. Long drives. Silent dinners. Nights spent crying quietly in the bathroom when she thought he could not hear her. But she always came back. Always. By 7:30, Ethan stood in the kitchen wearing a charcoal suit while trying to make coffee for himself. The machine hissed loudly before splattering bitter espresso across the marble counter. Seriously? He muttered under his breath. Claire usually handled mornings before he even woke up. His coffee, his vitamins, his dry cleaning schedule. Tiny invisible things he never noticed because they were always done. He grabbed his phone and called her again. Straight to voicemail. Ethan sighed impatiently and texted her. Enough already. Call me back. No answer. An hour later, he sat inside a downtown conference room surrounded by executives discussing a merger worth nearly $80 million. But the presentation slides blurred together. His attention kept drifting toward the empty seat beside him. Claire used to sit there during important meetings years ago before Ethan told her she made him look too dependent. He remembered the exact moment because she had smiled softly and agreed without arguing. Back then, he thought silence meant understanding. Now he was starting to realize silence could also mean heartbreak. During lunch, His friend Marcus laughed when Ethan mentioned Claire leaving. "Come on," Marcus said while cutting into a steak. "Claire worships the ground you walk on. She will be home before the weekend." Ethan forced a laugh and nodded, but something about the sentence irritated him this time. Worship. Was that really what their marriage had become? Not love, not partnership, just loyalty without limits. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. 6:20 p.m. The apartment was still dark. He loosened his tie slowly while the city rain streaked across the windows in crooked silver lines. The silence felt heavier now, uncomfortable. He opened the closet again. More empty hangers than he remembered. Claire's navy coat was gone. So were her running shoes near the front door. Ethan suddenly realized she had not left impulsively. She had planned this. Carefully, quietly. He walked into the bathroom and froze again. Her skincare products were missing from the counter. The tiny glass tray she kept beside the sink was gone too. 12 years of routines erased with terrifying precision. Ethan leaned both hands against the marble sink and stared at his reflection. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. His phone buzzed suddenly. His chest tightened instantly. But it was only an automated reminder from his assistant about tomorrow's investor dinner. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Then he noticed something folded neatly inside the bathroom drawer. A receipt. Small. Wrinkled. From a diner in Brooklyn dated almost 3 months earlier. He remembered that night immediately. Claire had asked him to meet her for dinner because she had important news. Ethan never showed up. He had chosen drinks with clients instead. At the bottom of the receipt, written in Claire's soft handwriting, were 5 words that made the room suddenly feel colder. "I ate alone again tonight." By the 3rd day, Ethan stopped pretending he was not worried. The confidence he wore so easily in front of other people had started cracking in private. Claire still had not answered a single call. Not one message. Not even anger. And somehow that silence felt worse than a fight. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen early Saturday morning staring at 2 coffee mugs before realizing he only needed one now. The second mug stayed untouched beside the espresso machine, white ceramic with a tiny chip near the handle. Claire's favorite. He remembered making fun of that mug once because she refused to throw it away. "Some things are still worth keeping even when they are imperfect," she had replied softly. At the time, Ethan barely looked up from his laptop. Now the memory lingered in the apartment like smoke. Rain pressed against the windows while New York moved below them in restless gray motion. Taxis, umbrellas, steam rising from street vents. The entire city kept going while Ethan's home felt frozen in place. He opened the refrigerator again without thinking. Still empty. No meal containers neatly labeled in Claire's handwriting. No sliced lemons in glass jars. No fresh flowers near the sink. The apartment had lost every trace of softness. Ethan suddenly understood something uncomfortable. Claire had not made the penthouse beautiful because she loved luxury. She had made it beautiful because she loved him. Around noon, Ethan drove downtown hoping distraction would fix whatever this feeling was. He met Marcus and 2 other clients at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. Expensive wine, polished silverware, conversations about investments and market forecasts. Normally, Ethan thrived in rooms like this. But halfway through lunch, he caught himself staring at another couple seated near the windows. The woman laughed while adjusting her husband's scarf against the wind. Small gesture, barely noticeable. Yet Ethan felt something twist painfully inside his chest. Claire used to do things like that. She used to straighten his tie before meetings, brush lint from his coat, wait awake until he got home safely. Tiny acts of care so constant he stopped seeing them. "You look miserable," Marcus joked while pouring another drink. Ethan forced a smile. Claire is still doing her disappearing act. Marcus laughed immediately. "Please, that woman adores you." Ethan looked down at the untouched glass in front of him. For the first time, the sentence did not sound flattering. It sounded cruel. Later that night, Ethan returned home carrying takeout from Claire's favorite Italian place in Brooklyn. Habit. Pure habit. He realized it halfway upstairs in the elevator. The paper bag felt strangely heavy in his hand. Inside the apartment, the silence greeted him again like an unwelcome guest. Ethan set the food on the counter and loosened his collar slowly. Then he noticed something else missing. Claire's piano. The small upright piano near the living room window where she used to play late at night when she thought he was asleep. The space beside the bookshelf stood empty now except for faint marks in the carpet. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. He had not even realized she arranged for movers. How long had she been planning this? His chest tightened. He walked into the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of Claire's nightstand for reasons he could not explain. Inside sat a stack of folded papers tied together with a pale blue ribbon. Letters. Dozens of them. Every anniversary card Claire had ever written him. Ethan opened the top one with trembling fingers. The ink had faded slightly over the years. "I hope one day you love me the way I love you," it read. Ethan swallowed hard, because suddenly he realized the most terrifying thing of all. Claire had been lonely long before she ever left. The strange thing about freedom was how quiet it sounded at first. Claire Bennett woke up to the sound of waves instead of traffic on the fourth morning after leaving Manhattan. Soft gray light spilled through the thin curtains of her small coastal apartment, while seagulls drifted across the cloudy Massachusetts sky outside. The place was tiny compared to the penthouse. Barely 700 square feet. One bedroom. Faded hardwood floors. A coffee maker that rattled loudly every morning. But for the first time in years, Claire could hear herself think. She sat cross-legged near the window wearing an oversized cream sweater and held a warm ceramic mug between both hands while steam curled slowly into the cold air. No one was waiting for breakfast. No one needed her to organize their schedule. No one was ignoring her across a dinner table while staring into a glowing phone screen. The silence here felt different. Not empty. Peaceful. Claire closed her eyes for a moment as ocean wind brushed softly against the glass. Her phone buzzed once beside her laptop. Ethan calling again. She stared at the screen without moving. 12 missed calls now. For voicemails. 7 messages. None of them asked the question she once begged him to ask for years. "Are you okay?" Claire pressed the side button gently until the screen went dark again. Then she stood and walked barefoot across the apartment toward the kitchen counter where sketches and fabric samples were spread across the surface. 3 days earlier, an interior design firm in Boston had accepted her freelance proposal. Small project. Boutique hotel renovation near Cape Cod. Nothing glamorous. But when the acceptance email arrived, Claire cried quietly into both hands because it was the first thing in years that belonged only to her. Before Ethan's company became successful, Claire used to dream about opening her own design studio. She loved textures, lighting, warm spaces that made people feel safe. Back then, Ethan promised they would build both dreams together. Then his career expanded while hers slowly disappeared inside his shadow. Claire remembered the exact moment she stopped mentioning her own goals. It happened during a dinner party 6 years earlier when one investor asked what she did for work. Ethan smiled casually before answering for her. "Claire keeps my life running." Everyone laughed politely. Claire laughed too. Then she went home and quietly deleted the business website she had been building for months. Now, standing inside her small apartment miles away from him, she realized something painful. Ethan had not stolen her life in one dramatic moment. She had given it away piece by piece, trying to be loved correctly. The kettle whistled softly from the stove. Claire poured hot water into another mug and looked out toward the beach again. A young couple walked their golden retriever along the shoreline below while cold wind pushed against their coats. The woman slipped slightly on the wet sand, and the man immediately reached for her hand without hesitation. Such a small thing. Yet Claire felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes. Not because she wanted Ethan back, but because she finally understood how little she had been asking for all these years. Attention, warmth, presence, love that noticed when she was fading. Her laptop chimed suddenly with another incoming email from the Boston firm. More revisions. More work. Claire wiped beneath her eyes quickly and sat back down at the table. Outside, the ocean kept moving beneath the pale winter sky, while sunlight slowly broke through the clouds in thin golden streaks. For the first time in a very long time, Claire did not feel like someone waiting to be chosen. She felt like someone returning to herself. Sometimes the people who save you do not arrive loudly. They arrive gently, like rest after exhaustion. 2 weeks after leaving New York, Claire stood inside a small art gallery near the Boston waterfront, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold in her hands. Soft jazz drifted through the room, while quiet conversations blended beneath the warm amber lighting overhead. The gallery smelled faintly like paint, cedarwood, and rain carried in from the harbor outside. Claire had almost not come. One of the designers from the hotel renovation project invited her at the last minute, insisting she needed a break from work. But now she found herself wandering slowly between abstract paintings while trying to remember what it felt like to exist somewhere without tension sitting permanently in her chest. Most people in the gallery wore expensive coats and polished smiles. Claire noticed how easily couples touched each other here. Fingers brushing sleeves, hands resting gently against backs. Tiny, effortless affection. She used to crave things that simple. She stopped in front of a large canvas painted in deep shades of blue and gray. Storm colors. Lonely colors. The kind that looked calm until you stared too long. That one usually makes people uncomfortable. The voice beside her was low and calm. Claire turned slightly and saw a tall man standing nearby, with dark hair touched faintly by silver at the temples. Late 30s maybe. Navy wool coat. No wedding ring. His expression carried the strange kind of confidence that did not need attention. Maybe because it feels honest, Claire replied softly before she could stop herself. The man studied the painting for another second before nodding once. Most honest things are uncomfortable. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Daniel Hayes, he said, extending his hand politely. Claire Bennett. His handshake was warm but brief. No lingering. No charm performance. Just respectful. Somehow that felt unfamiliar to her now. They stood beside the painting in comfortable silence for a moment while rain streaked softly across the tall windows overlooking the harbor. Then Daniel glanced toward the untouched coffee in her hand. That cup has been cold for at least 20 minutes. Claire blinked in surprise before letting out a quiet laugh. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who forgets to drink his own coffee too. He lifted his own untouched cup slightly. Claire looked at him more carefully then. There was no arrogance in his voice. No pressure. He did not seem interested in impressing her, which strangely made her relax more than flirting ever could. A few minutes later, they found themselves seated near the back corner of the gallery beside a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf while people continued drifting through the exhibits around them. Claire spoke less than usual, but Daniel never interrupted when she did speak. He listened fully. No checking his phone. No glancing around the room, searching for someone more important. Just attention. Real attention. At one point, Claire stopped mid-sentence because she realized how long it had been since someone actually listened to her without impatience in their eyes. Daniel noticed immediately. You do not have to explain everything perfectly, he said gently. You look tired enough already. Claire stared down at the coffee cup in her hands while emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat. Not because of romance. Not because of attraction. But because kindness felt almost foreign after years of emotional distance. Outside the gallery windows, evening fog rolled slowly across the harbor while city lights blurred gold against the rain. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair before asking quietly, "When was the last time you slept peacefully?" Claire opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, because the truth was, she could not remember. People rarely notice the exact moment regret begins. For Ethan Cole, it started with a signature. 3 weeks after Claire disappeared from his daily life, Manhattan had become unbearably loud. Every restaurant sounded hollow. Every meeting lasted too long. Even the penthouse itself felt unfamiliar now, like a luxury space designed for someone else's life. Ethan worked later than ever trying to outrun the quiet waiting for him at home, but exhaustion only sharpened the absence. One Thursday evening, he returned from a 12-hour negotiation downtown to find a large envelope resting against the front door inside the apartment. Plain white. No handwriting except his name. Ethan loosened his tie slowly while staring at it from across the marble floor. Something inside his chest already knew. The city lights flickered through the windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere below the tower. For a long moment, Ethan did not move. Then he finally picked up the envelope and carried it into the kitchen where Claire used to stand every morning slicing fruit, while half awake jazz music played softly from her phone. The memory hit him so suddenly he almost stopped breathing. Ethan opened the envelope carefully. Divorce papers. Clean. Organized. Precise. Claire had already signed everything. No emotional letter. No accusations. No dramatic goodbye. Just legal documents and a small handwritten note folded neatly beside them. Ethan unfolded it slowly. I stayed long after I felt loved. That is not your fault entirely. But I cannot disappear inside someone else anymore. Ethan sat down heavily at the kitchen counter while the words blurred slightly in front of him. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in soft, uneven rhythms. He looked toward the empty piano corner again. then toward the untouched dining table, then toward the hallway where Claire used to wait for him at night, pretending she had not stayed awake just to hear the elevator open. Suddenly, every room in the penthouse felt haunted by moments he ignored while they were happening. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face slowly before reaching for his phone. He called immediately. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. By the fourth attempt, frustration cracked through his voice. Claire, enough. We can talk about this. Silence. Ethan stood and paced through the apartment while thunder rolled above the city skyline. He wanted her to answer, wanted her to cry, wanted anger, anything that still connected her emotionally to him. But Claire had given him something far worse. Calm. The next morning, Ethan drove through heavy traffic toward the office while exhaustion darkened beneath his eyes. At a red light near Central Park, he caught his reflection in the windshield and barely recognized himself. He looked older now, not physically, emotionally, like someone slowly waking up from years of sleepwalking through his own marriage. At work, his assistant placed a cup of coffee on his desk exactly the way Claire used to. 2 sugars. Small splash of oat milk. Ethan stared at it in silence. Claire told me once that this was the only way you would drink it, the assistant explained carefully. Ethan felt something tighten painfully in his chest again. Even here, Claire had been taking care of him without recognition. Around lunchtime, Ethan signed the final merger paperwork while investors shook his hand proudly around the conference table. $80 million. Congratulations filled the room. But instead of satisfaction, Ethan suddenly remembered a rainy Tuesday years earlier when Claire stood in their old apartment holding design sketches for her dream studio. He barely looked at them before saying he was too busy. Now he could not remember a single business presentation from that year. But he remembered the way her face fell quietly before she smiled and said, maybe another time. Ethan finally understood the truth then. Claire had not left him suddenly. She had been leaving in pieces for years. He just never noticed until there was nothing left to lose. 6 months can change a person quietly. Ethan understood that the moment he saw Claire again. The ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, while New York's wealthiest guests drifted across polished marble floors, holding champagne glasses and rehearsed smiles. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase while cameras flashed near the entrance for executives, investors, and politicians arriving in tailored black coats against the cold December air outside. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his suit absent-mindedly, while half listening to a conversation about international expansion. He had attended dozens of charity galas in his life. Normally, he moved through rooms like this effortlessly. But tonight something felt off from the moment he walked in. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Manhattan winter always reminded him of Claire now. Then the ballroom doors opened again. Ethan looked up automatically, and suddenly the noise around him disappeared. Claire stepped inside wearing a simple black satin dress that fell softly to her ankles beneath a cream-colored wool coat dusted with tiny snowflakes from outside. Her hair was shorter now, resting lightly above her shoulders in loose waves. Minimal jewelry. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to prove anything. Yet somehow she carried herself differently. Lighter. The strange sadness that used to live behind her eyes was gone. Ethan forgot to breathe for a second. Around him, conversations continued normally. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed softly beneath the music. But Ethan could only stare at her crossing the ballroom with calm, steady steps. Claire no longer looked like a woman waiting for love. She looked like someone who had survived disappointment and no longer feared it. Ethan excused himself mid-conversation without hearing his own words. His pulse hammered strangely as he moved through the crowd toward her. Claire noticed him before he reached her. Of course she did. But instead of panic or anger, she simply paused beside one of the tall window arches overlooking Fifth Avenue and met his eyes calmly. That calmness unsettled him more than rage ever could. Claire. Her name left his mouth almost carefully, like something fragile. She offered a polite smile. Hello, Ethan. No bitterness. No trembling voice. Just distance. Ethan stared at her for a moment longer than necessary. You look, he stopped himself. Happy sounded too selfish. Beautiful sounded too small. Alive sounded too honest. Claire glanced briefly toward the snowfall outside the windows before looking back at him again. How have you been? She asked softly. Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. How had he been? Sleeping badly. Working constantly. living inside a penthouse that felt colder every night, eating dinners alone while replaying years of ignored moments in his head like punishment. But standing in front of her now, all he managed to say was, "I have been trying to reach you." Claire lowered her gaze for half a second before answering gently, "I know." Ethan swallowed hard. The orchestra music drifted softly through the ballroom, while golden candlelight reflected against the glass behind her. For one painful moment, Claire looked exactly like the woman he married years ago. The woman who used to wait awake for him, with tired eyes and cold coffee at midnight. Except this version of her no longer looked like she needed him to stay standing. "I should have listened," Ethan said quietly. Claire studied him carefully then. Not cruelly, just honestly. "Yes," she replied after a long silence. The word landed softly between them. Somehow that made it hurt more. Ethan opened his mouth to speak again when movement near the staircase caught his attention. Several investors suddenly straightened their posture as a tall man approached through the crowd in a dark tailored coat. Calm, confident, familiar. Ethan felt his stomach tighten instantly the moment he recognized him. Daniel Hayes. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing someone else learned how to love the person you took for granted. Ethan watched Daniel Hayes cross the ballroom with the calm confidence of a man completely comfortable in his own presence. People moved subtly when Daniel walked past them. Investors straightened their posture. Executives interrupted conversations just to shake his hand. Ethan knew exactly who he was. Everyone in finance did. Daniel Hayes was the founder of Hayes Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. Quiet billionaire, ruthlessly intelligent, rarely seen in public unless the event actually mattered to him. Ethan felt cold realization settle heavily in his stomach as Daniel approached directly toward Claire. But what unsettled him most was not Daniel's wealth or influence. It was Claire's face when she looked at him. Soft, peaceful, seen. Daniel stopped beside her naturally, as if standing near Claire was the most obvious place in the room for him to be. No dramatic gestures, no possessiveness. He simply rested one hand lightly against the small of her back while looking down at her with quiet warmth. "I was looking for you," he said gently. Claire smiled faintly. Real smile this time. Ethan had almost forgotten what that looked like on her. Daniel finally turned toward Ethan with polite recognition. "Ethan Cole." Ethan forced his expression into something controlled enough for the ballroom around them. "Daniel." Their handshake was brief, professional, yet Ethan felt strangely outmatched before either man said another word. Nearby conversations blurred into soft background noise beneath the orchestra music, while snow drifted slowly outside the tall windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Claire glanced between them calmly, completely unaware that Ethan's entire world felt like it was shifting under his feet. Or maybe she was aware. Maybe she simply no longer felt responsible for protecting his emotions anymore. "I did not realize you two knew each other," Ethan said carefully. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his coat slightly before answering. "Professionally, yes." Ethan nodded once, but his pulse had already begun climbing. Hayes Capital had recently started acquiring controlling interest in several companies connected to Ethan's expansion projects. Rumors had been circulating for months about a major restructuring coming early next year. Suddenly, Ethan understood why Daniel's presence tonight felt dangerous. Not because of business, because of Claire. "Claire mentioned your hotel renovation project in Cape Cod," Daniel continued casually. The investor presentation was impressive. Ethan looked at Claire sharply. "You are presenting now?" Claire met his gaze steadily. "I have been leading several projects recently." Ethan stared at her in disbelief for half a second too long. Leading, presenting, building a career again while he spent months imagining her sitting alone somewhere heartbroken over him. Shame burned slowly beneath his collar. Because the truth was horrifyingly simple. Claire had not been falling apart after leaving him. She had been rebuilding. A server passed with champagne glasses while warm candlelight flickered across Claire's face. Ethan noticed something else then. Claire no longer looked at Daniel the way she once looked at him years ago with nervous hopefulness, desperate to be enough. She looked relaxed beside Daniel. Safe. Equal. That realization hurt more than jealousy ever could. Ethan swallowed carefully before lowering his voice. "Claire, can we talk privately for a minute?" Daniel immediately stepped back slightly without resistance. No controlling behavior. No tension. Just respect. "Of course." he said quietly before moving toward another group nearby. Ethan watched him go before turning back toward Claire. Are you with him? The question escaped rougher than intended. Claire looked toward the snowy windows for a moment before answering softly. I am with myself again. That is the difference. Ethan felt every carefully controlled part of him crack slightly at those words. Because standing there beneath the ballroom lights, watching another man treat Claire gently without being asked, Ethan finally understood the full weight of what he lost. Not his wife. Not his marriage. The woman who once loved him so completely she forgot herself, trying to keep him happy. The saddest endings are not loud. They happen quietly, while one person finally understands what the other already survived months ago. Snow continued falling outside the ballroom windows while the city shimmered beneath Manhattan's winter night. Ethan stood facing Claire near the edge of the crowded gala, yet somehow the distance between them felt greater than ever before. Around them, laughter echoed softly beneath crystal chandeliers while waiters carried silver trays through the sea of elegant guests. But Ethan barely noticed any of it anymore. His entire attention remained fixed on the woman he once believed would never leave him. Claire looked calm beneath the warm candlelight. Not cold, not cruel, simply at peace in a way Ethan had never truly seen before. Daniel stood several feet away speaking quietly with investors, but his eyes drifted toward Claire every so often with subtle attentiveness. Not possessive, protective, the kind of care Ethan suddenly realized Claire had always deserved. Ethan swallowed hard before speaking again. Was I really that bad? The question sounded smaller than he intended. More honest. Claire looked at him for a long moment, while orchestra music floated softly through the ballroom behind them. Her expression held sadness now, but not the wounded sadness he remembered from their marriage. This sadness felt gentler, like grief that had already healed around the edges. No, she answered quietly. That was the problem. Ethan frowned slightly. Claire folded her hands carefully in front of her, while snow drifted beyond the tall glass windows overlooking Fifth Avenue traffic below. You were not cruel every day. You were not some terrible monster. Her voice remained soft and steady. You were comfortable. And comfort can destroy love very quietly. Ethan lowered his eyes instantly because every word felt true. Painfully true. Claire took a slow breath before continuing. I kept waiting for you to notice I was disappearing. Ethan's chest tightened sharply. Claire. But eventually, she said gently, I realized I was disappearing from myself too. Silence settled between them again. Ethan remembered 100 tiny moments all at once. Claire asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. Claire smiling weakly during dinners while he answered emails. Claire standing in doorways wanting his attention while he promised, later. He used to think love survived automatically as long as nobody left. Now he understood love could starve slowly inside neglect long before anyone packed a suitcase. Ethan looked back at her desperately. I would change now. Claire's eyes softened slightly at that. Not hopeful. Compassionate. I know, she whispered. But you are finally learning the lesson from my absence instead of my presence. Ethan felt tears threaten unexpectedly behind his eyes. Not because Claire belonged to someone else now, but because he finally understood how deeply she once belonged to him. And how carelessly he handled that love while he had it. Across the ballroom, Daniel glanced toward Claire again without interrupting or pulling her away. Just waiting patiently. Ethan noticed that too. The respect, the space, the quiet certainty. Claire followed Ethan's gaze briefly before looking back at him. He listens when I speak, she said softly. For simple words. Somehow they shattered what remained of Ethan's heart more completely than anger ever could. Because Claire had never asked for luxury. Or perfection, or grand romance. She only wanted to feel seen. The orchestra began another song while snowfall thickened outside the windows, covering Manhattan in silver-white light. Claire stepped back gently then. Not dramatic, not emotional, just final. Ethan looked at her one last time and saw the truth clearly at last. The woman standing before him was no longer the lonely wife waiting beside cold dinners and unanswered conversations. She had rebuilt herself somewhere beyond his reach. Claire offered him a faint, bittersweet smile. I did love you very much once, she said quietly. That is why leaving almost destroyed me. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as the words settled heavily inside him. When he opened them again, Claire had already turned toward Daniel. He met her halfway, without speaking, and rested his hand softly against hers as they walked together through the glowing ballroom beneath the chandeliers. Claire never looked back, and for the first time in his life, Ethan finally understood that losing someone slowly could hurt far more than losing them all at once.